and thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening. I just want to say that I came across Jack Gilmore some time ago. He is part of your association, and I came across him because he was working for a very prestigious conservative think tank called the Bow Group. And I don't know whether any of you have come across the Bow Group, but Peter Lilly and many very senior Conservatives set it up, and it's been a very important think tank for the Conservative Party for decades. And I was so impressed with him when I came across him that I offered him a job in my office. And he's now my researcher. He was going to, after finishing at Durham University, he was going to go and start working in the Channel Islands. And I think his mum was a bit upset about that. But I offered him a job in the House of Commons, and he's been working for me for 2 months, and he's doing a very, very good job indeed. I see a lot of myself in him when I was his age, and he has a huge thirst for politics. He's very committed to the Conservative Party. And I think, you know, I've reached that age in my life now, at the age of 46, starting to go grey, where you start to think. There's something built in us, isn't there, where we reach a certain age and we start to think about getting the next generation ready to take over from us, nurturing them, supporting them, giving them the benefit of our experience. And I have a lot of hope for Jack as a future British Member of Parliament. And that's why I've come up, especially this evening, to address you and to support him.
Thank you.
Now, I'm the first ever, I have 2 USPs. I'm the tallest ever Member of Parliament at 6'9", and so I'm officially a giant. Because anything over 6'8.5" is officially a giant. And when I was first elected, the Guinness Book of Records came to see me because they had to measure me. And you are a different, would you believe, you are a different height in the morning than when you are when you go to bed. And so they had to spend the whole day measuring me because they had to get it right. And I'm also the first ever Polish-born British Member of Parliament. So I was born in Warsaw, and we came to this country in 1978 because my parents fled the tyrannical regime, the communist regime, which so devastated Poland. And I'll come on to how my family, the roots, came about. Now, last week or the week before, very recently, I went to the Royal Albert Hall on November the 11th for a Polish fest. Imagine 5,000 Anglo-Poles at the Royal Albert Hall with a huge Polish eagle at the front, Polish orchestra, Polish music, and it was a Polish extravaganza at the Royal Albert Hall. And it was celebrating, we were all waving our British and Polish flags, but it was celebrating the 100th anniversary of Poland regaining her independence. Some of you will remember that it was the Treaty of Versailles in 1918 that guaranteed the freedom of Poland and many other European countries that had been enslaved by the Russians, the Germans, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And it was the United Kingdom, after winning the First World War, it was the United Kingdom who insisted in the Treaty of Versailles that there should be self-determination for the people of Central and Eastern Europe, and it was thanks to Britain that Poland and many other countries in Europe regained their sovereignty. And this is a recurring thing which I'm going to talk to you about this evening, and that is, what has this island nation done for Europe over the course of the last 100 years? And how are we being treated now as we attempt to extricate ourselves from the tentacles of the European Union? That's my recurring theme, which I want to explain to you. Now, of course, I referred to the First World War And because of our treaty obligations with Belgium, we went, when Belgium was invaded in 1914, the British Empire went to war. And I asked Jack on the way here on the train, could you please tell me the British losses from the First World War? 700,000 men. 700,000 men. Today, we worry and really have a crisis when 20 people are killed or 10. 700,000 men lost their lives. Now, I don't know about Lancashire, but in Shropshire, where I represent, and I'm sure many of you have been to Shropshire, but only one village in Shropshire was completely untouched during the First World War. Every village had men dying from that village. And I went to just one tiny part of Shrewsbury for the commemorations of the centenary commemorations. It's called Frankwell, it's right in the centre. And just one tiny section of the town that I represent, Shrewsbury, 94 men were killed from that one area. So think about all the sacrifices this country has made. Then we move on to the Second World War. Because of our treaty obligations with Poland, you will remember, the British Empire yet again had to go in and save the day on the continent of Europe. And we got involved in the Second World War. British cities were destroyed. So many British cities were bombed and destroyed. And again, I asked Jack, on the train journey coming up here, what were the losses for the British during the Second World War? 451,000 killed. So many of our cities destroyed. And you know, we only finished paying off our debts from the Second World War 5 years ago. 5 years ago. We had to borrow so much money from the Americans that we've only finished paying off those debts 5 years ago. And I'm very proud also, just to even things out, that I'm sure you will remember, somebody said to me when I was standing to be MP for Shrewsbury, they said, well, Kawczynski, it's not a very Shropshire name, is it? They didn't quite pronounce it as well as your chairman. Kawczynski, it's not a very Shropshire name. How are you going to get by with a name like Kawczynski? And I said, it didn't cause my grandfather's generation any problems when they were fighting in the Battle of Britain. So I hope it won't cause me any problems today. And they all cheered. And there are 2 films that have come out in recent weeks. One of them, and I would urge all of you to go and watch if you can. One of them is called Squadron 303 and the other one is called Hurricane. And it highlights the unique contribution of the Polish pilots during the Battle of Britain. And something which I will never forget is when I went with Lord Tebbit to the RAF club. And he said, we had an Anglo-Polish dinner, and he said the Royal Air Force and the Luftwaffe was so evenly matched in the summer of 1940 that the Poles coming over in all those numbers tipped the balance to the British side. You can replace planes relatively easily, but you can't replace pilots. It takes a long time to train the pilots. And so I'm very, very proud that the Poles contributed so much. And we came here in 1978.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, so please forgive me. But my father was in the Second World War, but he was a Spitfire instructor. And so the best people who could, they could pick up things quickly, right up, and that was the Polish.
Yes.
And he taught a heck of a lot of the Poles, and they did exactly what he taught them. They killed many for us.
Well, the 303 squadron, the Polish 303 squadron, shot down more enemy aircraft than any other squadron. And the reason we're here is because my mother married somebody, an Englishman, whose father was one of those Poles who had come over during the Second World War with the Polish Free Forces. So we're very proud of those links. But then, after the Second World War, you get to the fact that British soldiers were at the front line of protecting Europe during the Cold War. Do you remember the huge amount of cost involved and expenditure of protecting West Germany and all those other countries because of the menace and the threat from the Soviet Union. I think young people today don't realise what an egregious and difficult situation we were going through in the 1970s and the 1980s, in the Cold War, with the build-up of tensions with Leonid Brezhnev and Andropov and all the other Soviet leaders. But it was Britain, yet again, that was on the front line, taking the lead in protecting the whole of Europe from aggression by the Soviet Union. And you know what? When Germany finally reunited in 1990, the United Kingdom decided to unilaterally give up all of its claims for any reparations. So this country never received a penny of war reparations from Germany. In the sign of goodwill, we decided, and I have written parliamentary questions on this, because I'm opposed to that sort of unilateral action. But in 1990, as a goodwill gesture to Germany, this country decided to give up all rights to any war reparations. Now, of course, you will remember our great heroine, who I had the privilege of meeting when I was first elected, Margaret Thatcher. She invited us to the Carlton Club. She poured me a very large scotch, and she sat down with me, put her hand on my hand and said, well, tell me all about yourself, dear. And I was in such awe, because this is the lady that I grew up as a child and at university, and she did so much. And when she went to the Gdansk shipyard in the 1980s, she gave hope. She gave those people hope. They were fighting against the oppression of communism. And who was it? Which was the country, yet again, that stood up to that tyranny and helped all those countries and the solidarity movement in Poland? It was Margaret Thatcher working with Ronald Reagan that together broke the back of the Soviet Union, and which then led to all those countries having their freedom. But it came at a huge cost to you, the British taxpayers. We had to outspend the Soviet Union to put pressure on them to realise that there was no way that they could carry on with their aggressive posture, and that they would find it impossible to keep up with us. Remember Star Wars and all those things? We made them realise if they were going to continue down this path, our capitalist system, which was much more efficient than their communist system, would ultimately outspend them, and they would find it impossible to keep up. But it was again at your expense. It was the British taxpayer that did all of this. Now, I've had people come up to me during the referendum in Shrewsbury and said, yes, but the European Union has kept the peace on our continent. We must vote for the European Union because it's kept the peace. Nothing to do with the European Union. What has kept the peace on the continent of Europe is NATO, an organisation which is anchored in the power and strength of the world's only superpower, the United States of America. But also, very importantly, Canada, Norway, Turkey protecting our southern flank, and also now the United Kingdom. These are 6 countries that are inextricably linked to the common defence of the continent of Europe, but that are not members of the European Union and will not be after March of next year. We also, you the British taxpayer, pay an inordinate amount of money for nuclear weapons. We're not just protecting ourselves, we're protecting the whole of Europe. These nuclear weapons are designed to put off any Russian invasion. Only 2 countries have nuclear weapons, France and the United Kingdom. How much do you think we've spent on your money on these nuclear weapons? £32 billion, just for the latest round of nuclear weapons, which are protecting all of Europe, and an annual cost of maintaining them and running them of £2 billion. Again, these things are benefiting the whole of Europe, but paid solely by the British taxpayer. And let me also say to you that we are handing over. I asked the House of Commons Library, what is our net contribution to the European Union since we joined? We joined this organisation on the day I was born, the 24th of January 1972. And since So our membership is as old as I am, 46 years. And we, according to the House of Commons Library, we have handed over £324 billion of your money since we joined. Net. That's the net contribution. There are only 2 countries that put money into the kitty, remember, out of 27, the United Kingdom and Germany. All the other countries take money out. Now, that's £200 million a week of your money that we're putting into the European Union. Now, I have to say to you, I don't know about you in Lancashire, but I can take you to schools in my constituency that have leaking roofs, poor insulation, where they're making cutbacks to teaching assistants, where they're having to have barbecues in the summer to raise money for basic equipment because there's not enough money. I don't know about your hospital, but I can take you to the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital where people are still on trolleys in corridors at peak winter times because there are not enough beds for them. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, we are handing over £200 million of your money every week to the European Union, whilst ourselves facing these significant shortages. Now, people say to me that, there are people in Parliament who just focus on the Operation Fear Mark II now, which is, if we pull out without a deal, go to WTO, it will be Armageddon, and we must have a deal, and all this and the other. Let me just say to you, I want to pay tribute to you, the British people, because it was you that insisted 20 years ago. It was you. You came to us, politicians, and said, carry on with the European Union project. Carry on sending £200 million of our money over there every week. Carry on. But one thing we will not allow you to do. There's one thing we won't allow you to do. And you were so vocal in this. And you said, under no circumstances are you going to ditch our currency. That is a step too far. That means giving up too much sovereignty. That means tying the hands of future generations. We will maintain our sterling, and we will not tolerate it being taken away from us. Now, if you hadn't insisted on maintaining your currency, I am absolutely convinced that in the referendum that we've just had, remember how close it was, 48 to 52, I'm absolutely convinced there would have been people who would have been petrified, who would want to vote for Brexit, but they would have been petrified because of the economic upheaval. It would have meant pulling out of the European Union, but at the same time changing currency. Can you imagine how difficult it is now extricating ourselves? Can you imagine extricating yourself from the European Union and changing the currency at the same time? But that is exactly what would happen to us if we stayed in the European Union. They want a single parliament, they want a single currency, a single flag, and now they're talking about a single European army. A single European army which at best will duplicate the services of NATO, and at worst will usurp the supremacy of NATO. And we have Monsieur Macron saying that America could potentially be an enemy to Europe. Can you imagine that? Now, I know that President Trump may not be to everyone's tastes in this room, but he's a transient figure. He's a transient figure. The people of the United States of America, when I go to the Senate and the Congress, they are absolutely committed to NATO, and they will stand by the United Kingdom no matter what, through thick and thin. We are genuine partners and allies. And do you know the people who abuse me the most on Twitter? Now, I'll give you a guess. Who do you think abused me most on Twitter? I just mute them, so it's all right. It's people, would you believe, who have one flag on their Twitter account, and it's the European Union flag. No British flag. And they don't associate themselves with the British flag. They associate themselves with the European Union flag. And they are buying into this whole concept of a supranational state. No. So, I think you have the courage to keep your currency, and I think you have the courage to vote to pull out of the European Union. And I have to say to you, and I'm going to wind up now because I want to take questions, but every time the people of any country have had the temerity to vote against the European Union, do you know what happens to them? They're told to vote again. Yes. You've made a mistake this time. Naughty. you must go back to the ballot box and you will vote again. And whether it was the people of Denmark, whether it was the people of France, or whether it was the people of Ireland, each time they've been told to vote again. Well, they've picked the fight with the wrong people this time. They are not going to bludgeon this country into submission. They are not going to force upon us another referendum. Over my dead, cold, listless body are we going to have another referendum. The British people have spoken. 17.4 million of them have voted for Brexit. And if we back off now, if we back down now, can you imagine what that will do? It will give a green light to, yes, we're moving ahead with a supranational project. Everybody is watching us. We are a petri dish. And there are hundreds of millions of Eurosceptics across the whole of the continent of Europe who are watching very, very closely how this sovereign nation extricates themselves. The country of my birth, Poland, there is already a Eurosceptic caucus being created there in their parliament. And they said to me this, we at some stage want to pull out ourselves. But if you, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, the 5th largest economy in the world, if you're being treated like this, what hope is there for us? So I will end, ladies and gentlemen, by saying this. It's not the decision you have taken, it's not just about now. It's not just about today. What you're doing is you have realized what's happened in this organization when we joined on my birthday, that it was then the European Economic Community. It then became, do you remember? It then became the European Community, then the EEC, now the EU. But there has been a methodical move to take power away from sovereign nations and move towards a supranational state. And I can guarantee you this. There are 8 countries in the European Union that are not members of the Eurozone, but they're all contractually obliged to join. They have no choice. People in the Czech Republic, 71% of the local residents in the Czech Republic want to keep their currency, but they've got no choice. The European Union is going to force them to have the euro. Once they've got the Eurozone, the whole of the European Union as in the Eurozone, then they would have come to us and said in 40 years' time, you know, you thought you had a permanent opt-out from the Eurozone. Well, think again. We can't have a system with 30 or 35 countries with one currency and you using your own currency. So what we've done is we're getting out just in time before this thing really starts to become a supranational state. 95% of the world's growth during the course of your lifetimes is going to be from outside of the European Union. 95% of the world's growth. 1.2 billion people on this globe speak English. 58 countries are tied to us through the Commonwealth. 20% of the world speaks English. There is a huge, bright future for us ahead, and the best days for this country are ahead of us, not behind us. Let's have confidence. Let's stand up to the European Union, and on March the 29th next year, celebrate becoming a sovereign and independent nation again. Thank you very much.